Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to another episode of Insaaf ki Baat. I'm your host Qandeel Baloch, and today we've been joined by Nida Aly, who is the Executive Director of the Asma Jahangir Legal Aid Cell. Nida, thank you so much for joining us and for taking out the time to be on our podcast. You also featured on season 1 of our podcast, so thank you so much for being a returning guest. I think, as always, we'll like to start off with a question about your own journey as well. Your area of work is extremely vast. I know that you work on child rights, you work on women rights, you work on minority rights, and then you've also been working on cases for asylum seekers as well. How did you end up doing the work that you're doing? Where does all of this passion come from? Because all of these are really difficult areas. And then considering the state of justice in our country, how does it make you feel?
Well, like most women, I was inspired by Asma Jahangir. So when I gave my final exam for my LLB, I went to her for internship. But I was very lucky that she hired me as her research assistant, and she was a UN rapporteur at that time. So I still think that it is probably the best compliment I've gotten in my life, that you go for internship, but you get offered a post when you don't even have a degree in your hand. Well, my journey started from there. She's always been my mentor, my inspiration, more like a mother to me. And everything she has done, I've been with her since I've been with the organization since 1997. And then I transitioned to Human Rights Commission of Pakistan for a few years. Then I was back with her. So I've more or less grown with this organization. My strength is that, we work on gender empowerment, we work on prisoners' rights, we work on legal aid for women, children, and religious minorities. My strength is that I've worked in every area. Normally people have, experience with working in just one area, but over the years I've been a coordinator for most of the projects, and, I've worked very closely with her. And hence, when there was a short sabbatical I took when I was getting married and I had other family commitments, she put me on the board of her organization. So I have never been away. My role has been very closely associated with AGHS. So since she was my inspiration, I followed in her footsteps, and I think I've been very lucky that, the only executive director that has come after, which is a huge compliment, and till date I say that it's very small person occupying very big shoes.
No, I think we can definitely say, having followed your body of work, I think we can definitely say that she was able to identify the right talent at the right moment. And I think that's an example of a great leader, that they always prepare the next leader to step in their shoes. And I think from your work and the way you've been managing the cell, we can say that you've definitely filled up those shoes really, really well. While 45 minutes is very little time to dissect all of the areas that you work on, I think we can perhaps start our conversation with gender-based violence. Your work around gender-based violence has been pivotal in shaping the work of the legal aid cell as well. I know that you partner up with various police organizations as well to provide legal aid to women as well. But at the same time, within the country, the conviction rate for GBV cases remains super low. And I think reporting and conviction rate both remain super low. What's your take on that, and what are the steps you think that can be taken by the state to ensure more conviction in these cases?
Well, Komal, I would like to acknowledge that Pakistan has a very good gender legal framework. Whilst we are very enthusiastic in legislating, but we have very little intention to transform this legislative intent into action and implementation of these laws. So unlike most countries, we have a very impressive legal framework to protect gender. But however, it continues to exist on paper, and but it has not been implemented, so that the intended beneficiaries never kind of get the benefit of these laws. Now, talking about gender-based violence, most of the cases, most of the issues with gender-based violence are undocumented. We do not have any database, a reliable database. Now, before coming here, I was looking at all the helplines that are available. We have, I'm sure you are familiar, we have a multitude of helplines, sponsored by the government. Some are with the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women, some are with the Ministry of Human Rights, and then there's the 1-5 police. But what happens when women call? So there is a big gap, a vacuum, where you can't do a needs-based assessment until you know what is the status of women facing domestic abuse. We do not have, there is a big gap in the available data. We don't know how many women get abused. We have no concept of intimate partner violence. Most of the sexual violence that takes place is not reported because it takes within the house and mostly by family members. So whilst we have a lot of abuse against women, it is undocumented, and mostly because the stigma attached to it. You know, we have social issues, we have cultural issues talking about abuse. We still haven't overcome that, you know, if a woman is abused, it is not her fault, and it is always justified as, you know, she must have done something to deserve that. And, you know, the men generally get away with it. And, you know, my always thing is that whilst we work with the low income areas or the lower tier of people with advocacy to make them understand that there's no shame in abuse, we also see that this mindset comes from the top. So recently, I don't need to name the people who've said it, but they've tried to justify sexual violence against women, who have said that, you know, men are not robots and men cannot be blamed for doing this. And then there was a very high profile case. The person who was in charge of the whole police thing said that what was she doing out at night? The woman was doing out at night at that time. So what is this message that goes across to people? That, you know, the woman must have done something to deserve this, you know. So this is not going to change the landscape of abuse unless we acknowledge it, that it is a violence of power, not of blaming a victim or a survivor of this abuse. Sexual violence conviction rate is recently, we've tabulated it according to the prosecution and the police data, it's 3.6%, but we're talking about rape and sexual violence. With the domestic abuse, we do not have data. We have, you know, we have general data available that a UN organization will say so many percentage of women face violence, but is there any data available? Whatever, Human Rights Commission is a good source, acknowledged source of information. They glean their information from print, you know, the news reports that come. What about the cases that go unreported?
And that's the majority of the cases.
Yes, and most of the helplines, the data they collect, is protected by privacy, which is how it should be. But that data needs to be tabulated at some level to know that how many women reported and what is the follow-up. Now, again, we have no such information that women who are calling them, are they getting relief from them? Then access to justice is very important. Reporting is not the only issue. Now, when they report, they are going to an institution to get some relief, some legal remedy, you know, to address their grievances. Now, in the federal and in Punjab, I can speak for these two places where we actively work, there is no law to give them free legal aid. The law exists on paper, but there is no mechanism that has been developed to give them free legal aid. Our organization is the largest service provider in Punjab. Now, if you take us out of the equation, who will do these 1800 or 1500 cases? Because the Punjab legal aid law has not been implemented, the federal one has not been implemented. So my issue is that it's not only making a phone call. What happens? Are they sent to a shelter? Do they get psychosocial support? Do they get the requisite legal aid? Does that happen? And whilst you can't provide the full service, there will always be a trust deficit in our system. Why would women come forward when they look at 100 other cases whose cases have not culminated in justice, giving them justice or some relief? So I feel that till you don't revamp the whole criminal justice system and the infrastructure to support the survivors, we are not going to see the change. Merely making the law is not enough.
Completely agree with you. And we've had this conversation before as well. We've been in rooms where a lot of the times it has been said that, you know what, accusations of domestic abuse, particularly accusations of sexual abuse, are made to settle family disputes and are made to settle land disputes. No such violence happens within the bounds of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Again, a mindset that we've seen from very, very senior people within positions of power as well. While the justice system sort of navigates this mindset, do you think that we have that the definitions of domestic abuse or how domestic abuse is framed within the legal framework of the country, does that do justice? Do we have a definition for domestic abuse? Does our law cater to domestic abuse? Because I do know that the Pakistani law, if I'm not wrong, does not recognize marital rape as rape. So we have a limitation there already.
No, marital rape, the rape law in itself can be interpreted to apply to marital rape. But since we've been working since 1980, not in our history, we have not ever received a single complaint of marital rape. So in our cultural setup, people do not recognize it as rape. And when you discuss it, the issue of consent with the law enforcement agencies, they say that there is nothing as marital rape. Once you get married, the man has free hold over a woman and he can subject her to anything. They will not say it's violence, but it say they can subject her to anything, and that is it. So whilst it is somehow protected under the law, we can interpret it, but we get no cases because we are not conditioned to believe that sexual violence within a husband and wife can happen. You see, that is a law. But most of the rape cases, you're absolutely right, that come, and we worked with a lot of institutions, starting from the judiciary to prosecutors to police, which is the first, who are the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. Now, most of them, they say that because when we speak to the investigating officers and the first responders, they think is that all the rape cases, 95% plus, are motivated by personal vendettas, and most of them are false complaints. Now, if you go ahead with this mindset while you're registering a complaint, then how will you ever think that this woman or this survivor, regardless of their gender, deserves an impartial investigation? When you're already in your mind, all these accusations are false and they're motivated to settle some score. So yes, gender sensitivity and gender sensitive procedures are a far cry and a very big step, it's the next step from the legislation that we have made right now.
So I think this sort of brings us to one of the other important pieces of legislation that you've been working on. That's the anti-rape bill. How is the anti-rape bill right now different from the laws that we already have in place? What's the protection that the bill provides to women?
Well,
because I think it's important for our viewers to understand.
In 2016 also, they made some amendments in the criminal justice, in our CRPC, to enhance the conviction rate and to give women more protection against sexual violence. Those were good amendments, and had they been implemented, I'm sure the conviction rate would have been better. But this law is very progressive and also very ambitious. When it was made, it did have a few gaps that we wanted to correct, but that didn't happen. Having said that, I've always welcomed this law. It is progressive. But you see, without allocating any funds for its implementation, because like I said, that it envisions an anti-rape crisis cell, special investigating units by the police, legal advisors. So they've increased the bandwidth of, how to apply this law beyond the resources that are available. However, having said that, this law was passed by the previous government, and full credit to the new government that it is taking it forward. So they have notified rules under 3 heads. They have made investigating units for the police in all provinces. They have notified special prosecutors. They have notified special courts under it, and also made anti-rape crisis. I think I've already said that, anti-rape crisis cell. They've gone fully forward to implement this law. Now the issue remains, the shortcoming that is visible now is training of the actors who have to implement this law. Right. Whether it's the judiciary or the police or the prosecution service we have, they have to implement. So they need training in this law, and people need to be aware that this law exists and they can come forward with their complaints and they can get relief from the courts. The biggest issue with the rape thing is that the trials are very long drawn out. So in the absence of any legal aid, like these limited resources, survivors are often vulnerable. The perpetrators are the influential ones. They are the most powerful ones. To have the legal and financial resources to pursue a legal remedy in a court, and if it takes you almost 2 years, nobody is going to pursue it. If there's not going to be a gender sensitive court where they are not, clubbed with other cases and men standing during the testimony, nobody is going to come forward. So all these issues, this law has tried to overcome all these shortcomings, which is good, because now they said that the trial should not exceed more than 4 months. So you have to limit the duration of the trial. You have to give a gender sensitive environment. You have to have a strong system where immediately medico-legal procedures are performed and taken. So if you are and a proper investigation takes place and there's women who are handling the case, I'm sure we will increase our conviction rate. But in order to implement it in letter and spirit, all the institutions they have to work together and their capacity have to be enhanced.
Now that you've mentioned medical legal aid, I think one of the major contentions within the medical legal aid system has been the two-finger test that has previously always been carried out to determine the virginity of a woman, so to speak, and determine whether a woman was raped or not. Do we now have legislation against that? Do we now have protection for women? Now, how is the medical legal aid carried out? Because I think, again, for our viewers, it's important to know what are the services and rights available to them.
So first, there was a very good judgment that said that the two-finger test has to be banned. Okay, that was welcomed by all the women and also by legal practitioners. And then the anti-rape law clearly has not included the two-finger, in fact banned it. What we will focus on is DNA testing. So which is important, and two-finger test was never used to determine whether rape. Obviously it could show that she had been forced, but it was more or less used against the women to assess her character. Yes, because to see that whether it was she was forced the first time or there's history behind it, about her activities. So it was very unfair. And similarly, any questioning to negate a woman's character or to assassinate her character, that she was habitually active before this sexual violence allegation, has also been ruled out under the law in a very good judgment by the Supreme Court, and also by our law and evidence, that it has taken out that you cannot bring a woman's character into the testimony. You cannot, because it cannot be used against her to assess her claim. So which is one of the biggest steps, and I think that is where Pakistan is very progressive.
I think that's even just hearing about that it's wonderful to hear that, because you really cannot say that we're not going to take into account that this was a forced sexual act of violence and this was rape, considering that you were active in the past. Again, consent can be withdrawn at any time, and once consent is withdrawn, that means that it's rape. So I think
absolutely. I think we as service providers are struggling with the issue of consent the most, because you see, we do not know where the line is. If somebody agrees to have a cup of tea with somebody, they feel that this is an all-out invitation for other things also. So the concept of consent is very unclear in Pakistan. So hence that is the reason we do not recognize intimate partner violence, especially marital rape. That when you have a nikah nama and you're validly married to somebody,
you've given consent for life.
Yes, so absolutely. So with all these actors in the criminal justice system, we struggle with consent. We get such questions that sometimes we also fail to respond, that how do you even deal with answering a question that consent is not starting with a cup of tea or anything like that.
Our conversation also really closely ties in with some of the recent cases of violence that have taken place, particularly a few of them that have taken place in Islamabad as well. We recently saw that an anti-honor killing bill was also passed after Qandeel Baloch's killing. And then we've also seen in the past, so that's one example of when there is general overall public backlash and there is conversation on digital media, particularly to create pressure. We see that immediately ad hoc bills perhaps at times are passed. Again, and since we're not experts of the sector, you are, I am not sure of the efficacy of those bills that are passed on an ad hoc basis. At the same time, we've also again seen that FIRs against certain cases have only been registered after public outcry and public backlash, and there are multiple examples of that. Noor Mukadam's case was an entire example of that. The incident that happened in Minar, Pakistan with a young girl on 23rd of March, that was the case. And then these are some of the cases that are high profile cases. Cases like this happen every single day within the vicinity of within every Pakistani household. Do you think these ad hoc bills actually allow the Pakistani legal system to further its case, or rather inhibit some of the laws that are there to protect? What's your take on that? I think.
Let me just start with, I completely agree with you what you said. I feel that most of the legislation that has come forward has been a knee-jerk reaction.
Right.
Because when there has been a public outrage about a selected issue and the whole world is demanding justice, and we get quite brutal in our demands, a public hanging, and people do not have the concept that it's not the severity of the punishment, it's the certainty of it. You can hang one person on some crossing, that will not deter that, but if you punish every person who is a rapist or who is a sex offender, you will probably have lesser crime. So absolutely all these that Zainab alert bill to start with,
yes.
It happened after the Sialkot reaction was this anti-rape bill. So everything has been a knee-jerk reaction to appease the public. You see, whenever there's a public outrage, this thing happens. Well, good that the law comes forward, because I always maintain that the first step is legislating. Once you have a law, whether you implement it or not, at least you have something on paper that one day that can be invested into and be implemented. So absolutely laws are welcome, but most of the drafts are, there are some issues in them, because the drafting of the laws have been done without involving sector experts. So they do it within the parliament, or I don't know how they are drafted, but there are always some lacunas or shortcomings in the draft, and there are procedural issues which will not take place, because they will interfere with the practical issues.
Right.
You see, so practically some issues are not implementable. But however, laws are welcome, because there's hope for them to be implemented one day. But I still maintain that the justice system should be fair to all. It should not be selective for that one rape case that got the attention of the parliamentarians and the judge became very active on that. What about the hundreds of other women? You see, when the Sialkot rape case happened, within 6 months, our organization AGHS tabulated that there was a woman who was raped in front of her children. What happened to that? And there was another case where women's limbs were cut off after a rape. So many issues came, but they never reached the public, so we don't know what happened in them. And they were not in our area, so we could not, provide the oversight in them. But the thing is that there's so many cases and more brutal than the first, but they don't get the same attention, because somehow, it has become a pattern that when there's a public outrage, there's a social media outrage, and then the whole government machinery comes into action, and immediately the perpetrators are caught and they are, put on given death penalty. But what about the hundreds of other cases? So absolutely, I do agree with you, but again, I prefer that legislating is a first step and is a welcome step. But I wish they would put more thought into
doing this,
into drafting the laws.
You've mentioned children already, and when we talk about sexual violence, I think there is still at least some conversation around protecting the girl child. But I don't think we have any conversation, legislation, anything that caters to the boy child. Even within households, when we are being raised, we're told to protect our daughters, we're told to protect our sisters, we're never told to protect our brothers and our fathers or our husbands, we're never told to do that. What's your take on that, especially the new bills?
The anti-rape bill does cover boys under 18, okay? But the other part which goes into the investigation and trial of that only mentions the woman. So these are the issues that we brought up, like if you're covering a male child also and women under one, the definition, then it is not, the second part of it is not covering the same. However, there is punishment for, we refer to it as unnatural act. There is punishment for it, but unfortunately, in our criminal justice system, the mechanism is not, very well implemented. It does carry a punishment of 7+ years and everything, but again, it has to have the same punishment as the rape law, but now it covers it, and it's just a procedural issue, and the committee is sitting on it, okay, the anti-rape committee, and the men under 18 will also be taken under this, they come under the purview of this law.
Do you think just having men under 18 protected is the right way to go about it? Or in your legal opinion, do you think we also need to have
Well,
rules?
you see, under this law, it will be under 18, but they have the other, under the criminal law, they have the right to take it to the criminal courts.
This brings me to one more question. A lot of the countries in the world, especially a lot of the developed countries in the world, have publicly available lists of sexual offenders. Pakistan does not have those lists. I also know that there have been conversations about Pakistan trying to come up with a list. What's your take on that? Do you think it would be possible in the near future for the country to have such a list? And importantly, with such low conviction rates, is it even going to be useful to have that list?
You see, that's my whole issue is. Absolutely, I agree we need to have a sex offenders list. It is very important to identify them. But there are two issues. One, if you have a conviction rate of less than 3%, well, recently it seems it's 3.6, but we've always maintained it's less than 3%, who do you put on that list? So, yes, we absolutely need to start on having a sex offenders list, but we don't have a data protection law. Now, who will have access, where will this list be housed, and who will have access to it? And what if, with our system where why we are against death penalty? Because we can, it's a human rights issue, it's a human rights abuse, but with the level that our criminal justice system operates, there's an issue of making a mistake of punishing the wrong person.
Absolutely.
And there is no going back after death penalty. So there is no acquittal after that if you have already acquitted it has been executed. So the same is with that, if you convict somebody and with our system and there's no data protection law, you put the wrong person in there, you are ruining somebody's life. So from a human rights we need to have a very foolproof criminal justice system to have these things. We have to have a robust data protection law and very little access to this. Absolutely, the police should have access to it, the right institutions, but it should not be a public list, and we should also share it, I believe, and like if other people are interested in sharing lists, so it should be quid pro quo. We should have access to their information and they should have access to our information, because sexual predators and sex offenders are menace to any society, and they are the ones who are working with a very strong acquittal rate. They are on the they are loose and they can harm anyone.
Do we have mechanisms of data sharing between different provinces as of right now, where provinces share data of their?
I'm not sure, but I've been sitting with a few police personnel, and they have said that some of the data. Now this is hearsay. So because I've not being a non-profit organization, we do not have access to that data. So whatever I say is just hearsay, and I cannot say with certainty this has happened. Some of the data has been computerized, some of it is still not computerized, right. I believe, in a couple of provinces. They are open to sharing it, and they have said that we should have a central system, but to extent of my information, it is not centralized right now. But I can be wrong.
Right, because we hear, and the reason I ask this question is because we hear a lot of reports of somebody first being convicted in one province and then the person carrying out the same act of violence or the same act of brutality in another province, and the person being unchecked when they're in the jurisdiction of a different police department or a different.
Well, police says that they have a lot of extensive data on people and possible sex offenders, because they will also have the data of somebody who has been accused.
Right, fair
not
enough.
Only of conviction, and they are willing to share that also. But I think they need to be. I mean, again, the issue comes of lack of resources, and this data needs to be shared within the police. But again, like I say, that it needs a proper data protection policy, because people who protect this data need to be trusted.
Absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with you, and I think it's akin to again destroying somebody's life, as you've rightfully said, that is if they're convicted wrongfully. You mentioned the death penalty, and I know that your stance and your organization's stance has absolutely been against the death penalty. And I think since late 2019, if I'm not wrong, Pakistan has not carried out any death penalties. Is there any legislation that sort of prohibits that right now, or are we doing that because of the international pressure? Why?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Not a single execution has happened since December 2019. It is because of the international pressure, and also we have a GSP plus status with EU and everything. So all these things accumulatively have stopped. Whilst we had death penalty on 33 accounts, they have, we are under the obligation to minimize them and keep them for only for very heinous ones. That is one obligation. But you see, my thing is that yes, in an Islamic country, abolishing death penalty is a long route. It will take time. It will be done through advocacy at the highest level. It cannot be done between conversation between legal practitioners and everything. It is a government decision. It will happen at a high level, and I'm very hopeful it will happen one day. But I've always believed that, whilst we are talking about abolishing death penalty, let's minimize misery of the people who are already in prisons. Because what happens is that a person who has been convicted with death penalty will at least, at an average, spend 10 years in prison before they are acquitted. And currently in the last 2 years, out of 24 cases, we've had 12 people acquitted on death penalty and 4 commuted to life sentence because of faulty investigation and faulty trials at the lower courts. So my issue is that, what we advocate for is that we need to revamp the criminal justice system and the prison system. We need to strengthen our probation and parole system, that people who are incarcerated in our overcrowded prisons, they can come out quickly and
get speedy justice.
Yes, absolutely. And the right to life and liberty should be upheld by having, taking people who are languishing in jails for years being under trial.
Who would you say is responsible for the overpopulation of prisons in Pakistan? And is the solution building more prisons?
No, absolutely not. We have almost 2.6 million cases in the backlog in our judiciary. Right now, the death penalty appeals that are being heard are from 2018 and 2019. So we are already in 2023. Sorry, numbers give everybody a headache.
No, but this means that a backlog of 5 years when it comes to at least death
penalty.
And
longer, because God knows when they were arrested. So in the last 1 week, we've had 3 women, they were not on death penalty, they were given life imprisonment. We have had them taken out of the prison after 7 to 8 years of incarceration.
That's
a
3 cases. Of a person.
Yes. So I mean, this if we had a expeditious system, at least will minimize their misery. And we have 43 prisons in Punjab, and we have overcrowding by at least 64%. So if you have a system which is not keeping people who are under trial for years, at least we can help those people who can face their cases at the appellate forum and can come out. Right. So I feel that while we have a conversation with the government on death penalty to abolish it, we can also work on a criminal justice system which gives faster justice and does not keep prisoners in the prison for years before they even get acquitted. What can we say about their mental health when they come out after 10 years?
I mean, you've destroyed a family's social structure, social fabric, taken away a person's economic means, taken away their liberty of freedom. Essentially, they're restarting their life.
And without any legal help from the state also. There is legal help, but not enough.
I think when we talk about gender crimes particularly, I think credit where credit is due is also a really important step. Recently, we've seen Punjab police, we've seen Islamabad police as well. I think, if I'm not wrong, Balochistan police has also done this. All of these police, KP also previously had gender desks available, but a lot of them have also made gender protection units as well. Do you think that gender protection units, and I know that they have become centers where free legal aid is also being provided to women, where trained staff is available as well, gender sensitized staff I would say is available. Do you think these are playing a critical role in in improving women's access to justice?
Yeah, absolutely. The best example would be there's a gender cell in Punjab. We've signed an MOU with them. Right. Our lawyers go there to they spend a few hours in the gender cell so that any survivors who come, they can be legally counseled. So any sexual violence cases are referred to us. So what we feel that there has been progression in the police. At least the second tier of the police is very gender sensitized, and they are willing to help women. And they have asked sometimes, in tricky cases, they've asked for our legal help also, that legal advice. So whilst I say that a huge lot of the police also needs working with their mindset, like we said that 95% of them think, even at the higher level, that most of the complaints are false. Yes. But yes, there is improvement, and the second tier is reaching out to civil society organizations or service providers like us, and they want to help all genders, not only women, children, transgenders, and they have a lot of empathy for them. And also, there's one thing that people say, that there is more violence because more cases are being reported. Actually, I disagree with that, because violence is mostly unreported. The cases have always been the same, if not more. More cases are being reported because there is evidence that people are trusting our institutions more by taking their complaints forward. And all credit to some police officials who are actually helping the survivors to register complaints, and they also follow up in investigations till the time the case lands in the court.
No, absolutely. We were in one of our guests on another episode of the podcast also mentioned that Punjab actually had the least number of incidents of violence against transgenders as well. So I think that does show that Punjab police, through the protection units that it has been establishing and through the desks that it has been establishing, has really been helping in increasing the reporting of the crime, because we do know crime has been happening in the country, continues being happening, but increased reporting, I think, is perhaps a good way forward.
Absolutely, I agree that when more people go forward with their complaints, other people are encouraged. But however, also this comes with a pinch of salt, because that if they don't get justice through the courts, then other people will be discouraged also. So it has to go the full circle, that it's not only the police, but then it is also the court case that has to go forward. With your comment on transgenders, I feel that the violence against them has escalated a lot. And very little legal redress has been available to them. And it's unfortunate that while we have been one of the most progressive countries to give them legal cover through the 2018 legislation, we are also now, it is being contested. Yes. And it is being revised, which is very, very unfortunate. And instead of implementing that law by giving them good health care and access to services, we are trying to backroll the progress we've made. And with that, you see, again, this mindset trickles down. And if you see, the violence that is being reported against them is brutal.
It's inhumane, I would say.
Yes, and it has become worse than it was before. So in Punjab, there are cases of violence. If they're not being registered, this one of the reasons could be because people are not willing to come forward. And I don't agree that the cases are less, because violence, Punjab is one of the largest provinces, 11th largest country. So violence is not less in Punjab. It is a question of reporting.
Fair enough. I think that sort of brings us towards our concluding question, and I think this is a question that I end up asking anyone and everyone who's working with the police, who's working with the justice sector as well, and you've already somewhat hinted at it as well. Is looking at the number of FIRs registered per month, per day, per week a fair criteria of assessing how much crime is actually happening in the country or not? Because
absolutely not. Because you see, we also know that there's a thana culture. And people, there's so many people who are hesitant to go to approach police stations, because a lot of police stations now in Lahore have women police officers. Very few of them don't have. But having said that, this mindset that we have, that once you go into a police station and you will be exposed to this thana culture, this term has been coined. So people are very hesitant to go to the police. And I feel that most of the cases do go unreported. And, there was one comment I wanted to make earlier with domestic abuse. You see, the law on domestic abuse has still, the Protection and Prevention Bill, Violence Against Women in Islamabad Capital Territory, has still not been passed. So the Punjab one was passed in 2016 and it was notified in November 2022, which means a law...
What are the impediments in passing the Islamabad one? Why hasn't it?
Well, it came up for discussion on the floor of the National Assembly, and our Interior Minister said that this is an issue of Chadar and Char Diwali, which is a private issue within a family matter and should not be discussed. Then one of the ministers said that we are referring it to the Islamic Council of Ideology. Then the Minister of Human Rights said that it was not referred there at all, and however, it was lost in translation. Even KP, normally we say that they are, the least hesitant. They have a bill on domestic violence. Balochistan has, Sindh has, Punjab has, but it is unfortunate that Islamabad does not, the federal territory does not have a bill. And they are so reluctant to pass that somehow, equating violence against women with religion is unfortunate, because what does any religion have to do with getting sanctioned to abuse women or not?
And Islam is again a religion of peace. That's literally
absolutely, I agree that. So equating that is the first
misstep.
Yes, in that. And even in Punjab, you see, most of the cases that come to us for dissolution of marriage are actually domestic abuse cases, because the law itself was not operational. So women had no relief under the law. It is a good law, and it can save a lot of marriages if it is implemented. But since it was not notified in all the districts till late last year, we could not use the law to the advantage of women. So in the end, when the abuse would exceed a certain threshold, women had no choice but to come to us for khula or for custody of children or financial maintenance claims. So we hoping that now that the law has been notified, we will be able to help women get protection from domestic abuse.
I really, really hope so, and I really hope that we're able to get the bill passed in Islamabad sometime.
We're lobbying for that, and in fact, the Law Minister and the Secretary for the Law and Justice Commission are completely on board, and they say that it's only a question of time that it will be passed. So we have assurances, and I hope they...
Fingers crossed that it happens for the betterment of women all around the country. Nida, thank you so much for taking out the time and for joining us today for the conversation. As always, I've learned a lot, and I continue to be in awe of the great work that you and your organization are doing. Thank you so much.